Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started. We have a lot of content today. I'm Patrick Glazier. I chair McKinley Advisors Research and Insights in our business transformation practice areas. Along with my colleague, Mina Dayak, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes, I'll be leading today's webinar on business model innovation. We're thrilled that you could join us today. The topic of today's webinar is really all about the business side of your organization, an area that I think we all realize is extremely important, but what we probably don't talk enough about. At the heart of our work, and hopefully you've had a chance to look over our paper, which we'll make available to you if you haven't, but the heart of our work is that recognition that associations are under more pressure than ever today in order to be competitive, in order to control their revenue and expenses, to operate efficiently, to come up with new revenue streams. And they're really in a position of competing against organizations that they might not have had to compete against in the past. And that includes all of the kind of traditional revenue streams that we find for associations, things like education and professional development, all the way through conferences, certification, you name it. What we wanted to do with this work and what we wanted to talk with you about today is really about understanding those different dimensions that are inherent in your business model, that if you were able to isolate them, if you're able to understand what they are and put enough attention on them and just force yourself and encourage yourself to assess them on an ongoing basis and grow with them, would make you competitive from a financial standpoint and really drive your mission forward. Now, what is an association business model? Well, the concept of the business model, of course, is very common in the for-profit world. For-profits have been using it for many decades to understand what they needed to pay attention to in order to be competitive, understanding that if they sort of took their eyes off the ball and missed one of these crucial areas or crucial dimensions, that they might not be taking care of the organization as a whole. The problem with the traditional concept of the for-profit business model is that it doesn't quite fit comfortably for associations. So for-profits have different goals, they have different missions. They tend to talk about and relate to their markets in different ways than we do in the association world. And even the language that we use in the association world is different enough where that concept of the for-profit business model doesn't quite fit. Terms like, distribution channel or even profit. We of course know what these things are, but we talk about them in different ways. So it was really our goal to develop a model that each of you could use in your own associations, that if you paid attention to it, if you digested these different dimensions that we've defined, it would really set you up to be competitive in all of the important areas that matter. In other words, to redefine that traditional concept of the for-profit business model. Now, there's a couple of key elements to this business model that I'd just like to make you aware of before we cover each in more detail. The first is just that we understand, of course, that the work that you are up to as associations is really all about your mission and delivering on that all-important mission. But the reality is that while you're doing that, you also need to be profitable. You need to generate a net revenue in order to reinvest in that mission and accomplish everything that you're capable of accomplishing. And so this business model that we've developed for the association world respects that fact, and it's about delivering on that mission and doing it in a way with the right products and services that will also turn a net revenue for you and make you successful. The second thing is that it respects the fact that associations show up in a different way in the world than do for-profits. There are just things that we care about as associations that you might not care about as a for-profit business. Mina will cover this in just a minute, but even you take the concept of community as an example. In the for-profit world, most, not all, but most for-profit businesses would not be overly focused on creating community for their markets. They just have a different mission and think about who they're serving and how they're serving them in a different way. But in the association world, even if you don't have a membership, quote unquote, community turns out to be a really powerful thing, even for your products and services. It's something that we care about. So it's built into this business model, as are some other things. that we need to consider in a unique way. And then the last thing is that it's a living and breathing tool. So much like you wouldn't develop a product or a service and then consider yourself to be done and move on and never think about it, and you would like to instead evaluate that product and service so that you know where you are in the product life cycle, that you're assessing how it's doing, and then you're potentially even optimizing or sunsetting it at some point. We need to be thinking about all the dimensions of the business model the same way. We want to come back and check on these things, see how we're doing on an ongoing basis in order to make sure that we're really being conscious of everything that's going on in our organizations. Now, I have not gone over, and Mina has not covered the dimensions of this definition of a business model. That said, I would love just a quick gut check from you, and I'm going to ask you to participate in a poll now. But how confident are you in your business model? And you can answer very confident, somewhat confident, not very, and not at all. And how confident are you that your business model is really set up to provide your organization with financial stability in the future? Okay, go ahead and get in your last responses, and then we'll see how the data shakes out. Okay. So we have about 5% reading the results here, 5% that are very confident, 48% somewhat, and then the rest are either not very confident or not confident at all or unsure. This is not a surprise to me. I'll tell you that if your business model is not exactly where you want it to be, right now you're not alone in that. And that's a big part of why we're having this conversation today. I think it's just the reality of the fact that associations, again, are in a new competitive space that we might not have been in 20, 30 years ago, where there's that much more change going on that we have to manage. In fact, we had asked the same question a couple of years ago. McKinley Advisors was supporting ASAE in the Association Insight Center program. We had the chance to ask a couple of hundred association CEOs how they felt in terms of their confidence for their own business models. And we found that only about a quarter felt very confident that it was really setting their organization up for success into the future financially. And as a consequence of that, only about the same number, a quarter to a third, felt as though it was going to allow them to deliver on their mission going forward. The key parts of that research, aside from that quantitative data that came out of that, were one, the rationale or the reasons why people felt that way. And we learned through talking to them that there were a lot of different individual themes, but the biggest one overall would be probably what feels very familiar to you. It was disruption. The idea that associations nowadays, not only do they have these new forms of competition, but technology is evolving so quickly that even if there aren't new forms of competitors coming in that are using that technology to disrupt their own services, it's creating an echo effect that if you're used to service like you get with Amazon, then you have the expectation that your association is going to operate similarly. Or if you have really engaging experiences when you're on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever it might be, you expect the world to evolve in those other places as well. So associations are very much feeling the heat, needing to do two very challenging things at once. Deliver on that really important mission, but also make sure that everything the association was up to was evolving at the same pace that the for-profit sector, that other organizations are evolving. Now, another interesting facet of that research was that we had the chance to talk to those organizations that were doing really well, that felt I'm in the 25 or 26% that does feel very confident in our model, and here's why. And I'll tell you that there were two dynamics that I read into that research. The first is that organizations that were doing well were doing a lot to innovate. They were constantly testing their own organization, and they were putting in the systems and processes to be successful. Now, I will mention that for most of them, they had a fairly limited, or what I would call a fairly limited way of doing that. It was mainly focused on developing new products and services. And that's certainly a part of it, that you need new products and services to grow, and that should be a part of what you're doing. But there were organizations that certainly took a broader lens to how to be successful. And that's what we really wanted to bring forward in our more recent research and then in this model. And that broader lens looks very much like them recognizing, we need our staff to be innovative. So we're going to challenge our cultural norms and create systems where they're incentivized to innovate. We need to constantly think about operating more efficiently. And so we're going to put time and effort into our operational efficiency. We need to rethink about how the market is changing and maybe expanding. And so can we think about who we're serving and have a more expansive definition of who our target market is? Even if they're not going to be a part of that core membership, we can still create things that can be positioned to them. Organizations are thinking very broadly like that and constantly learning to expand how they might be more successful from a business model standpoint. And that very much informed or was an early part of the informing of this more recent work and what we would like to bring to you in this business model definition. Now, there are 5 dimensions that we're going to talk to you about in terms of the association business model. And this work really came from the last handful of months when we were looking very deeply into the literature among associations and the for-profit world. And we were doing a lot of primary research with folks like yourself, associations that we had worked with before, and who told us about their own success stories. And we were able to triangulate those 2 things, look into the research and our experience working with many of you, and then the success stories. And we really identified these 5 core areas that if you're able to feel pretty good that you're running really solidly in these 5 areas, you're really set up for success. And so I'll let Mina talk you through these, and then we'll come back to talk about how you can diagnose and assess each of these areas.
Thank you, Patrick. Good to be with all of you. So based on the work I do as a practice director at McKinley, leading organizations that are thinking about their business model, and also insights gained from my colleagues who lead similar projects, we've uncovered a few, and in talking with association leaders, we've uncovered a few great examples around each of these dimensions, and I thought sharing those today would help to drive it home. So we'll start with value, the value proposition. Often when I ask an association what their value proposition is, they will either point me to a statement on their website or to their member benefits brochure. All of that is good, but value really comes from not those branded statements, but really thinking about what the pain points of your audience are and how you can solve for them, what it is that you can offer. So one great story I heard about this was from Reggie Henry, probably needs no introduction for most of you at ASAE. Um, it started during COVID when ASAE did online meetings, like pretty much most of us were in the association world. And the options that they had for industry partners, for exhibitors, were they started with a combination of Zoom and their learning management system, and they offered these chat rooms. Exhibitors would hang out at the online chat rooms. Attendees would, and hope that attendees would go there to talk with them. Wasn't really working well, and that led to ASAE having a conversation with industry partners about not just the online component, but post-COVID, when you come to our meetings, when you come to ASAE Annual, when you come to the MMCC as it was known then, what is it you're really looking for? And many of the industry partners said that what they wanted was solid leads, a certain number, quantifiable solid leads out of each meeting. And when they dug further and said, what do solid leads mean to you? They said, we need people to watch our demos. We need them to engage with us, and we would love their contact information for follow-up. So that got Reggie and his team thinking, and they came up with the idea of demo days. So demo days is really about gathering vendors under a particular who offer a particular type of product or program or service all together over a concentrated period of a day, half a day, whatever that looks like. It could be all AMS vendors, it could be all learning management system vendors, and having them talk to attendees about just basically do product demos. They people were apprehensive, but staff were apprehensive, but they got this off the ground, and their very first demo days apparently had about 900 registrants, and 800 of them attended some or all of the demos. The industry partners were very happy with the quality of leads, and exactly what they had asked for had been delivered. So Demo Days has become an embedded and revenue generating product for ASAE now. And this really came from talking to the audience, from listening for their pain points and saying, if what we currently have is not actually hitting those pain points, how do we redefine value? How do we offer this to them in a way that will make sense and help them achieve their goals? So that was a great partnership, and value really comes from listening. Very closely linked to value is the dimension of revenue, right? We think about, as Patrick was saying, we tend to think about revenue mostly in terms of what products and programs and services we have. Can we get more people to come to the annual meeting? Can we upsell this product? Can we, get a few more numbers down here? Um, all that's good, but revenue really is a mix of thinking about your whole investment. It's thinking not just about revenue, obviously, but also about the margin, right? You might have a product that is bringing in that is your largest revenue stream, but how efficient is it? How much staff time is it taking? Are you getting a return on investment? And revenue is also about not only thinking about new and additional sources of revenue, but it's looking at what you currently have, seeing what's working, and being able to make data-informed decisions about what you really need to let go. And then there's always product adjacencies, market adjacencies that you can look at. And another great example, sponsor related in this case too, but holistically, when the Construction Specifications Institute was thinking about what they wanted to be and who they wanted to serve, they decided that they wanted to be, in Mark Dorsey, the CEO's words, they decided to be member centric, but all of their revenue was not member dependent. They really went beyond members to thinking about who else they could serve in that space, who else needed to know about specifications, how did they need to get them in the construction industry. So they did a whole rebrand and went from being sort of a chapter focused organization to being a digital first organization. And they made some advances in their digital strategy, which really worked for them. Most importantly, sponsorship became their number one revenue stream, and that was because they regarded their sponsors or their industry partners as true thought partners in developing solutions for the community. So they brought them in on the content development side. They didn't simply think of a laundry list of here's the benefits that we will offer them, but they helped to think about how they could forge meaningful connections between the buyers and the sellers. They opted for smaller and more niche meetings where the connections would be more meaningful. And this approach to really thinking about the value helped them increase the sponsorship revenue actually sixfold. Their other revenue streams grew as well because of their approach and their focus and really thinking about who they wanted to serve and how they could do it best. It was a very holistic approach, but that story of growing revenue sixfold is pretty impressive. And the third dimension that we uncovered is really important in the association business model mix is community. As Patrick said, that is such a distinguishing feature for associations. I mean, others can offer content, others can offer the kind of meetings or opportunities that associations might, but I would say nobody does community as well as associations do. And community is not just obviously your online platforms or how people are talking to each other, but it is how you are enabling the connections to happen across the ecosystem, and how you're able to do it, how you're able to supplement and make community a vital part of every product or every offering that you have. As Preet Basi, the CEO of the Center for Public Safety Excellence, told us, um, you know, if membership is just that laundry list of benefits, if you're just sending people into the exhibit hall and it's about the size of your booth, or if it's just about how many education offerings you have, um, you probably will be in maintenance mode and not poised for growth. But if there is community, if people are able to connect with each other, learn from each other, and if they are able to forge meaningful connections using your organization, your association as a platform, then your offerings have so much more value. They have so much more meaning. So CPSC was offering, their primary offerings have been accreditation of fire departments and credentialing program for fire and emergency services professionals. What they found was that accreditation happens one, and renewal of your credentials happens once in 3 years, once in 5 years. And they found that people were really not engaging with them in between those cycles. So when they decided to invest, and they went in with eyes open about the costs and what kind of talent and staff it would take to manage it. And when they started a community and helped people come in and get some education, have their questions answered, have other people to talk with, uh, that just really changed the paradigm for them. They were able to benefit from just much greater engagement, much greater retention, and a larger percentage of fire departments and audience members coming back to reaccredit or to recredential. So that investment in community has really paid off, and I'm sure you all have many more examples of that. Reach is pretty closely related to community, but I would say the one thing that we as associations tend to do, and I say we because I've been on your side and been in associations before, is we think about everything in the context of our members. Members are important, but so I think I lost control of the slides. David, give me a minute here.
While we're pulling up the slides, we did have a question, Mina. Who's involved in thinking through these dimensions? Is this staff only, or is this done with your governing board?
I would say you definitely you need a leader, right? Like you need somebody to be the first one to think about this process. You need the executive team involved, but you definitely need the support of your board and your governance as well. So you have to be able, when you are thinking about innovation, when you are thinking about changes, you have to be able to make the business case and get your board on board, so to speak. So it really is a multi-pronged effort. And I think, Patrick, that's another area where we are a little bit not a little bit, like totally different from the for-profit world, right? Like our board does have a say. The board is kind of the front wheel driving the organization. You want their buy-in, you want their support. But we'll talk more about that in a second when we talk operations. So great, we got the slides back. So thinking about reach. Reach is really, as I was saying, about thinking beyond your membership to who your customers and your audiences can be beyond that. Not every membership may not be for everyone, but there are different subsets of stakeholders that might engage with your organization in different ways. And even beyond sort of that member customer interface, you want to think about reach in terms of where your association is in the ecosystem. Chances are there are other associations who are reaching your members or some subset of your members and customers in some way. There are probably for-profits, there are industry partners offering different kinds of options. So it's thinking about your role and where you fit in that ecosystem and whether you can potentially be a convener. So reach is about thinking of all of these things. And I know it's probably outside the comfort zone for many associations to think about broadening their reach. So we spoke with Sherry Cisse-Tufor, the CEO of the Pediatric Nursing Certification Board. And she gave us an excellent example of how they expanded their reach while still staying true to their mission of being able to offer the best care to children, to the patient, and to young people. And she said that after a lot of thought and internal processes, they actually thought about for the first time in 10 years, they launched a new product, and that was a micro credentialing and certification for a behavioral health and adolescent mental health stream. And when they did that, they said, wait a minute, it's not just our usual audience of pediatric nurses in the United States that would benefit from this. There are other audiences that could really benefit in this day and age from a course on behavioral health, on mental health. So let's really open this market up to all of them. Let's broaden the market. Let's make this global. Let's bring in other people and reach out to them and market to them. And this was definitely not something that she got broad buy-in on initially, but she had to work on it. And the shift in perspective really helped them. But ultimately, she was able to make the case because they were staying true to their mission, the mission being good care for the patient, providing the best quality healthcare. And there was no way you could say that having a broader audience come in and take advantage of this micro credentialing was not going to serve that ultimate purpose. So thinking about your mission broadly definitely helps to expand reach. And that brings us to the final dimension, but maybe one of the most important. So thinking about operations very broadly, Patrick, as you were asking, operations really is a combination of your internal organizational structure, the talent you have in place, who's doing what, and then it's obviously for associations, the governance, right? Like what kind of a board do you have? Who is your board composed of? What are both the opportunities for the board to be agile, for you as an organization to be agile, and what kind of a culture do you have? What kind of systems do you have? Everything from your data systems to your technology, how you're using it, how you're leveraging it, what kind of data you have. Operations can really be all of these things in areas that need attention for you. Ultimately, in order to have a successful business model, you want to have both the right culture as well as the structure to support innovation. And Kate Fryer, the CEO of the Endocrine Society, really has understood this. So they've been very innovative as an association. They set up a business development fund and got buy-in from their board because they made the case to them to take some of their reserves and invest it in new opportunities, in probably things that not only endocrine, but most associations would not even do. It definitely tied into their mission, but they were willing to experiment. They were willing to consider a range of investments and make the best decision. And they had the culture which said, we're going to take the MVP, the minimum viable product approach. And even if things don't, we have certain goals, and if we don't hit them, and if our initial efforts are not as successful as we hope they would be, there are lessons to be learned. You fail quickly, you learn those lessons, you move on, and you figure out what the next thing is. And in order to be able to do this and do this well, one of the lessons they learned was that they need the right skills and talent. They need all of their internal systems working together and upskilling and bringing in the right kind of expertise. So they were able to do this by bringing in some external help to lead them through the innovation effort, if you will. And they definitely looked at all of the dimensions and find that that is helping them, is giving them a strong foundation as they continue to innovate. So those are just a few of the stories. I hope they brought to life for you what we mean by each of the dimensions, but happy to discuss that again as we dive into questions. Patrick, I'll hand it back to you to talk us through how we actually execute and measure on these dimensions. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead with the. I just wanted to address reinvention, which we think of as when it's not just one of the dimensions, when you're not just focused on revenue or thinking about community, but there's probably some element, there are multiple elements when you have different things that you want to address at the same time or in a phased manner, but you know that there is probably a case for overhaul. There's a real case to be made for all of the different elements syncing with each other and working together. So we do hear, while they are a little less common and they can be a daunting effort, sometimes reinvention becomes necessary and self-disrupting or looking at what fundamentally needs to change in order to be responsive to what the market is showing and to competitive forces really points towards that. And a quick example again of what reinvention can look like. The Association for Supply Chain Management is one of the leading associations in their profession, but they operate in a heavily competitive environment. And while they are an association and very focused on their mission, they also made the decision to think more about customers and not just members. And they validated and affirmed that they were not just there to serve members, but that they really wanted to be the source for supply chain education. And then they thought about their entire organization and everything they do through that lens. So they made several, I would say, upgrades and important decisions across the board. They branded themselves, for example, they took a look at their entire event portfolio and they said, calling our meeting an annual meeting makes it feel like it's something just members go to. They rebranded that as they called it Change, CHAINGE, which was to indicate that this is actually the premier conference in the supply chain world, and we want to invite everybody to think of this as a resource for them. We want to broaden our audience, invite more people to come. They also went from a focus on credentialing individual professionals in supply chain to really strengthening their corporate offerings, where they saw that they could provide more value and where it would be a greater source of revenue as well. And while they were making all of these changes to increase their appeal, to broaden their reach, and to grow revenue, they also took a look inside and realized that they could not operate in silos anymore, that they really all needed to come together and think about their customer and think about their offerings as a whole. So they did that. They developed a system of shared metrics. They took a look at how they could collaborate across functions. And today they operate as one seamless, interconnected, high-performing organization. It started with the executive team and cascades down to the entire organization. So everybody is really on board with that, with those central goals. There's clarity, there's very clear purpose, and that helps them move towards fueling the association mission in a stronger way. So that's sort of a holistic picture of how those different dimensions can really come together. And it has happened successively over a phase of 3 to 4 years. So it's a journey, and but it starts with realizing that many aspects need attention. And with that, I am really done, Patrick, and will ask you to run the poll.
All right. Thank you, Mina. I do want to ask a quick poll question. I'm just curious where you're all at with that the different dimensions of the business model. So the question that I'd like to ask you is, for your association, which dimensions might need to be optimized? And you can select up to 2 options from each of those 5 that Mina had covered: value, revenue, community, reach, and operations. Okay. Let's see if we have the results for those. Ooh, it's about an even split all the way across. So I'm seeing about 50% indicated value and revenue and slightly less community reach and operations. That's really interesting. I had guessed before this presentation that we might see more of a focus on something like value, which of course among our community is something we talk about quite a bit, but also revenue because associations are under such stress. But it is not shocking given that each of these areas are so important and we need to pay attention to each of them. So that's a really interesting sign. What I do want to do is for a minute just talk about, okay, so we know what the 5 dimensions of the business model are. Maybe we're interested in assessing how we're doing on each of these. How might you do that? And there's obviously a lot of different ways that you could identify where you might need to make some improvements. There are, different ways to facilitate that conversation with your volunteer leadership as well as among staff. And we received a question earlier regarding should this be a conversation among leadership or should it be among staff? And what I would say and add to what Mina mentioned is that ideally, when we're talking about, the business model, and particularly if we're going to make changes to the business model, there's a change management component to that. Because when you are making a change to something, any one of these dimensions, it's going to affect lots of people. And so it'll become important for everybody to at least some extent get on the same page about how do we feel about these different dimensions. And I think the conversation can start in one place, perhaps among staff, and that information could be taken to the board and built upon as well. Let's talk for a minute about how you might do that. And I'll tell you about the McKinley approach. And again, knowing that there are different ways, depending on your organization and your culture, that might feel right for you. So if you've worked with us before, you know that we're very data informed and we place a lot of value in that. And what I would share with you is that as you're thinking about diagnosing your business model and then maybe coming up with some solutions that are going to optimize an element of it or 2 elements of it, you're going to want to facilitate that conversation among a team. Just like I was mentioning a minute ago, there's this important element of alignment. You're going to want to take people on that journey with you. For one, you probably don't know enough. You don't have enough of the full picture to really assess what's going on there. And, more than one brain working at the same time could be a real help to that. So just having a team with you to have that conversation is going to be important right off the bat. As you get further down the line, you might decide that you want to do something with your community, or maybe you decide you need to develop new products and services. And by the time you get to that stage in your journey, it would also be helpful for your team to be brought along with you, for them to understand why it is that you want to focus on community or new products, and for them to understand the vision. So again, doing this as a group makes a heck of a lot of sense just from a change management standpoint. It's helpful to have data. So when you are having emotional conversations, one that requires you to maybe talk across the table with areas that matter a lot to people, grounding that conversation in something very specific that you can all get behind, that also gives you a lot of insight, can be really important. And since we're talking about these 5 big areas, there's also a lot of good data and indicators that we can pull that are probably readily available to us. And I'll give you a couple of hints at this. It might look a little bit different for each association, but just know that it's not going to answer the question for you. It's not a silver bullet that's going to tell you exactly which area to focus on, because in large part, that's the subjective question that you're going to want to figure out as a team. That said, there are a ton of good indicators that you can pull. So if you're thinking about assessing your revenue, for example, and this is maybe the easiest one, but you can look at net revenue. How much are your revenue exceeding your expenses? And not just that, but you might want to get some context into it. So if you have a net revenue that's looks healthy from the outside, just at a quick glance, how does that look when you develop a competitive set of 5 or 10 associations that are more or less in your field or close to your field, and you look at what their net revenues are? Where are you on that curve? And you can actually get that information pretty easily. You can identify the organizations through a conversation that might be interesting to you. You can pull IRS 990 forms and really plot that out so that you have some normative data to understand, wow, before I thought we were doing good, but now I'm seeing that actually the average for groups that look like us is actually quite a bit higher. So maybe that's an opportunity for us. And you can look at all of these dimensions in the same way. So Something like value, many of you many of you collect data through regular opinion surveys. If you look at a net promoter score, that would be an indicator of value. And not only can you get that from your own association, but there's comparative sources of data out there on the net promoter score, for example. If you don't do a regular survey, we could look at some other measures and we could talk about that in the Q&A if anyone's interested in exploring these in a little bit more detail. But there's similar types of indicators for all of these. Market penetration, look at your actual member numbers. Compare that to Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example. Might not be perfect, but it'll give you a good sense of how much room to grow we have there. And while we're in that Bureau of Labor Statistics website, let's look at some adjacent fields and see what the potential might be there. When it comes to operations, you can look at things like, what is your staff expense as a percentage of your total revenue look like? Are we running efficiently? And what does that look like for that comparative set of organizations again? So these types of indicators, again, if you can picture the data for those, is not going to tell you, oh, well, we need to focus specifically on the revenue dimension, but it'll give you a good sense of, I feel pretty good that we're doing okay in this area, while this other area looks like it might be an area of suspicion that we can have a conversation around. Now, how might you do that? Well, I will do a little bit of a push here that McKinley is offering workshops, and we'd be happy to help collect this information for you and facilitate that conversation among your team. But you could, of course, do the same thing and really get together the right leaders in the room and structure a conversation around, okay, so we collected some data on revenue. We're doing better than we thought we were, but do we think that there's some low-hanging fruit and maybe an area for us to develop a new product in? Or maybe your conversation is around operational efficiency, where you see your staff expense is a little bit higher than the average. Are there good AI technologies out there or other tools that we could be using to run more efficiently because we think we have room to grow there? The conversation should look very much like that. And it shouldn't be about finding the one area that's going to solve all of our problems. It should be, we know we're working okay in each of these, but let's identify the best opportunity or two to focus on so we can challenge ourselves to continually grow. Now, the last thing I want to share, and then we can have a great conversation around this, is just the change management element of it. Now, the reason why change management is going to be particularly important for you to consider in the beginning is that business model dimensions are very interconnected, and you're going to have lots of stakeholders that are going to have some skin in the game on this, both internally when you think about staff, as well as volunteer leaders, members, you name it. Everybody's going to be kind of connected to each of these dimensions. And so it's going to be really important to run a process that's thoughtful and intentional, and that you can show that to the people that are involved. So, having that conversation that I just mentioned a minute ago, taking the time to collect data and have it grounded in data, and then be able to communicate out to others that, look, we went a process here and we solicited input and we had a conversation, and here's how we came to these conclusions and why we feel like we need to change in this area, is going to go a long way in doing that really fundamental part of change management, which is helping people to understand why it is that you want to do the things that you want to do and making the case to then do that. I think a couple other important things to consider when you think about the business model are, what's your risk tolerance? Many of us in the association world in particular, I may look at risk as something that we need to manage very tightly. But when we're in a posture of saying to ourselves that we might need to change a little bit more rapidly or urgently because the world is changing around us more quickly, risk needs to be looked at as something that isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, failure isn't a bad thing. It's going to happen. It's part of doing business, and we just need to manage to that. So we expect to fail, and we're going to ask ourselves the questions of, if we try something new, we're going to give it a certain amount of time. And if it's not working out, we're not going to just veer from that and go back to the status quo. We're going to make some course corrections. But we understand this is part of who we are now, and we're going to engage in this change, understanding that. And then another element of the change management will be that if you do decide to do something a little bit more significant, and that could be a reinvention like Mina was talking about a minute ago, or it could just be a significant change to any one of the dimensions that she's talked us through. So developing a new product or service. You might need to think about restructuring a little bit. You might have staff that you need to redeploy. You might need to hire new talent or get outside help because you're probably not, like the structures that you're using today are probably not fit for the evolution that you want to get to, perhaps, particularly if you have more ambitious goals with everything that you're doing. So just to be open to the idea of it starts with the business model, and that can oftentimes filter into many different areas that you'll just need to evolve to at the right pace. What I want to share with you is a QR code very quickly. If you don't have our report at the moment, you can take a picture of that QR code. It'll allow you to download it, and we'd love to have your feedback and hear what you think of it. And with that, I want to carve out a little bit of time. We have just over 10 minutes for any Q&A that might be top of mind for you. So, Mina, I'm going to share one with you. Do you have any suggestions for approaches to calculating ROI of programs, and how do you evaluate the importance and link to the mission when doing so? And I'd be happy to fill in on this too, Mina. But how do you calculate ROI for these programs?
So we typically use a combination score, which looks at revenue and expenses, which looks at margin, but also takes into account satisfaction ratings, if any, with different programs, the level of participation, and then we look at mission alignment and how that particular program positions the organization in the market. Is it critical? If the organization didn't do it, would somebody step in? What would that do for your brand and your visibility? So there are any number of factors, and you can come up with a composite score that takes all of those pieces into consideration. And then it's unique in the case of each association. Sometimes to start off with, you may not be tracking all the data that you need to. One example is staff time. We find that it's often not attributable to specific programs. So we can put certain systems in place, but then we work with as much data as possible and at least try to look at, for example, do you have how many full-time employees do you have working on this program or that product, and try to make some informed and educated estimates. Ultimately, the data is really important, and that, along with understanding of your audience's pain points, will help you make an accurate estimate, and I guess be able to get the data together to make the case for a change.
Great, thank you, Mina. I also want to acknowledge Bruce had asked, or Bruce mentioned that boards are often risk averse and they don't want to fail or failure to happen on their watch. And that's absolutely the case. One of the things that you can do is to be intentional about making a case to boards that perhaps the riskiest thing to do is to not take risk. And that might involve showing them, here's what our future looks like down the road, particularly if you can gather some data on the market competition and maybe if you are in the position of losing some ground there. Or you can kind of talk them through the value and how to manage risk as an ordinary course of business. Mina had shared the example from Sherry Susay-Tufour from Pediatric Nurses Certification Board. And one of the things I'm aware of that she has done is to make her board more comfortable with the concept of risk by actually going to them and asking for an innovation fund. So they're specifically willing to carve out at least a portion of their revenue, put it aside so that they understand and they're deliberate right off the beginning that this is money that we're using to reinvest into the association. We expect to fail some of the time, but we're creating some boundaries on what that looks like by having a separate fund. And you begin to change the culture and the narrative, perhaps by taking some steps in that direction. But to Bruce's point, 100%, that's going to be one of the pieces of inertia that we need to think about when we're talking about making some of these changes. Any additional questions for Mina or I about the report or concept of the association business model?
Patrick, I see a question, and you may be able to provide a good answer to this. Can you talk a little bit about competition? What kind of for-profit competitors are encroaching on traditional association offerings, whether that be meetings or certification or um, publications? And um, in this situation, how do associations protect the value proposition? How do they identify their distinctive advantage?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of the things that's brought us here today. I think that there are for-profit competitors and other types of competitors, even within the association sphere. We find ourselves competing more directly, more frequently now, and they look a little bit different depending on the product that we're talking about. You do have, traditional, really strong revenue streams like education and professional development that even very large for-profits have recognized are potential profit centers. So a group like LinkedIn Learning is a good example of this, where you could go there after this webinar and you could type in a search for almost any type of education you might be interested in, and even very technical types of education, let's say in the medical field, where you would not expect to see it in LinkedIn Learning. And you'll see some courses pop up. It's hard to compete against that if you're an association because you are so spread out in your mission and you're not necessarily thinking day in and day night about, well, how do I constantly evolve what our education looks like to be all that much more engaging? Because I have these competitors breathing over my shoulder. And you don't necessarily have the funds that, for example, LinkedIn has. And I don't want to pick on them, but they're a good example that they have to invest in this technology and really get it out there very quickly. Uh, there are versions of that for almost everything we do, conferences, publications, you name it, certifications, certainly. I think that associations have a couple of options when they think about that kind of thing. One is, and I'll mention this right off the bat because I started with LinkedIn Learning. One is potential partnership options, because as the leaders of content for your fields, as much as these competitors can invest and move very quickly with new technologies, they don't have some of your natural strengths in the types of content and authority that you have, or the goodwill. And so there are partnership opportunities that could benefit everyone. Second to that, you have the benefit and the luxury and the goodwill and that community that was Mina was talking about. So this involves both pulling in your natural resources in terms of who you can actually have participate in delivering this content and have them be these recognized authorities in the field, but also kind of building it into your education. How can we make community come through, or how can we bring forward the culture and the relevance of our association in these offerings so that we're truly leveraging our strengths and are able to compete against organizations that are moving very quickly. So I would say that's another thing. And the third is that this is more of an answer that I'm going to give you to kind of help you right size it for your organization. But I do think that you should challenge yourself to evolve what your offerings look like, and you should be aware of how they're changing in the for-profit sector. So you might not have the funds to be an early adopter of some of this technology, but while it's being settled out, and by the way, if you do, that's great, right? But I'm speaking to those of you who might not. Um, while this technology is settling out, you should be trying to understand it and making sure that you are evolving and that you're picking the winners, so to speak. So you're going to see new education technologies and new forms of publications come out that are changing very rapidly. Some of them are going to fail, some of them are going to succeed, and you should be aware of how it's evolving and challenging yourself to evolve at the pace that you can sustain. Because what you don't want to happen is for your membership to say to you eventually, I would really like to buy this through my association and support you, but you're just too far behind. I need to go to a group that's providing it to me on my own terms in a better way. I
Thanks,
mean,
Pat.
oh,
Go ahead. I just wanted to address the dialogue that Eileen and Bruce have had through the chat about the role of sponsors and industry partners and other stakeholders. Um, I think you are calling out an important point, Eileen and Bruce. You In order to be able to do a robust process of looking at your business model, you want to start with value. And in order to understand the pain points that go into informing what your value should be, you want to do the research, you want to listen. And that listening is with all of your audiences, your industry partners, or your sponsors, your exhibitors. They form a key part of that audience, and you definitely wanted to have that dialogue with them to see what it is that they're looking for, and then figure out how best you can deliver. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mina. So one last note, again, here's that QR code for you. All of the content, or nearly all of the content that Mina and I talked about today is in that report. You can get it right there. If you'd like the PowerPoint slides, please be in touch. Thank you so much for coming today. And please give us any feedback, or if you need any support in diagnosing these elements, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.